Hello, my name's T.G. Campbell and I am an award-winning crime fiction writer and creator of the Bow Street Society. So the Bow Street Society is a group of detectives operating in Victorian London. Each civilian member of the Bow Street Society has an ordinary job in addition to being a detective. So there's watchmakers, illusionist, architect, doctor, etc. amongst their members. And each member is assigned to cases by the site clerk, Miss Rebecca Trent, depending on what skills and knowledge are required. And when members are assigned to these cases, they use their skills and knowledge from their ordinary jobs to solve the cases. So you won't always get the same detective investigating all the cases. You get different characters returning and being called in at different times. So starting with the case of the curious client, there is currently 4 books in the series. Second being the case of Lonesome Lushington, the third being the case of the Spectral Shot, which I will be doing a reading for you today. And the 4th book in the series is the case of Toxic Tonic. If you would like to purchase these books, they are available worldwide through Amazon in all formats. If you subscribe to Kindle Unlimited, you can also download all of them for free through that. If you want to find a bit more information about the books, you can visit my website www.bowstreetsociety.com, and you can find out on there all about the books. You can read reviews, read reviews, the blurbs, and the links to the Amazon pages are on there as well. Okay, so I hope you enjoy this reading, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at info@bowstreetsociety.com. Alternatively, you can contact me through my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/bowstreetsociety, or you can find me on Twitter at bowstsociety. Thank you.
Prologue. Department store from Hell Exposed stated the headline from an old evening edition of the Gaslight Gazette. Upon reading it, Miss Trent's mind had evoked a buried memory of an account she'd been given at the time. A Bow Street Society member, who'd helped bring about the exposure, had told of a large pot atop a stove. A heavy pale mixture had been found inside. He, and others present, hadn't needed to rely on mere suspicion to know what it was. The grandfather clock's Westminster chimes from the hallway brought her back from her thoughts. While the 7th hour struck, she turned over the newspaper and slid it to her guest. They sat around her desk in the middle of her office at the Bow Street Society's headquarters. Signs of the former owner's tastes could still be seen in the high-grade, dark olive wallpaper, embossed with a scroll design, and the large oak fireplace on the far left. While she had the door to her back, her guest had the window to his, its curtains closed against the night. A fire had also been lit, and the gas wall lamps ignited to repel the cold darkness. To her guest's right was a filing cabinet containing square drawers the size of index cards. An improved Salter 5 typewriter sat on the desk in front of him. Had she possessed an inclination toward pettiness, she would have insisted upon her unusual seat. The case was solved, she stated. Justice was served. It was, as far as the court cared. I still have some qualms about it, though. Inspector Caleb Wolfe placed his large clasped hands upon the desk and leant forward, causing the wood to groan beneath his weight. Far from being a portly gentleman, Wolfe could nonetheless be described as stocky, solid even. His shoulders and chest were so broad that, as he moved forward, they'd entirely blocked the fire's light from Miss Trent's view. Also, despite his slouch, his shadow covered the clerk's entire form. A musty, damp odour exuded from his fur coat as it was warmed by the fire. Wolfe's brown eyes peered out from beneath a black, bushy brow as he scrutinised the stoic woman. She was in her late 20s and unmarried, a spinster in the eyes of wider society, yet Wolfe knew from experience she couldn't be scorned and dismissed so easily. Even then, her dark brown eyes were fixed on his. Others, he had found, tended to wander or look to an ear while in a policeman's presence. Her tendency, no, refusal to do the same was as intriguing to him as it was repugnant. It, coupled with a slight lift of her chin, made for an altogether defiant countenance, even when no emotion was expressed. On another occasion he may have admired the curve of her waist, accentuated by her corset undergarment, and her chest above the high, square neckline of her brown bottle dress. Tonight, however, his pride forbade him. "What we found in those rooms will haunt me until I breathe my last," he began in a solemn tone. "Calling them monstrous isn't enough to describe the absolute horror of what was done to those poor women. You'd agree?" "I would." "I thought so, but I'm still unhappy about what you and society did." Miss Trent parted her lips, but Wolfe immediately resumed. "The society interfered with a police investigation, which was bad enough, but something else irks me." His eyes narrowed and his tone hardened. "You let a vulnerable young woman investigate a room you knew nothing about without asking for the police's help. Those same horrors could have happened to her if the murderer had come across her there." "She would be dead, Miss Trent. What's more, her remains would have been given the same undignified treatment as those of Mrs. Roberts and her mother." "But he didn't, Inspector," she pointed out. "Yet, even if he had, she wasn't alone. Mr. Locke and Lady Alston were also present." "Beyond earshot," Wolfe growled. "You and your society put Miss Agnes Webster's life in danger without any thought of the risks involved." "Firstly, Inspector," Miss Trent interrupted, "the safety of the society's members is paramount to me. Secondly, I have the utmost trust in Lady Alston and Mr. Locke. They would have intervened had Miss Webster not returned when expected. Therefore your accusations are without foundation. They are also symptomatic of your categorical hatred of the Bow Street Society and of what we are trying to do." "Which is what, exactly?" "Ensuring justice is served for those who ask for it." "And putting your members' lives at risk in the process." "Enough, Inspector!" Miss Trent stood and glared down at him. In a heartbeat he too was on his feet. Towering over her 5 feet 7 inches with his 6'4", he bellowed, "You will listen to me, Miss Trent, and you will listen carefully." Miss Trent put her hand on her hip but remained silent. "If you and your society insist on facing danger unnecessarily, you will do so under my terms. You will give me a full list of your members so I and the Metropolitan Police can stop them from being murdered, attacked and robbed. Try to justify what you do as much as you like, Miss Trent, but at the end of the day you are all just bloody civilians playing at a copper's game." "And yet we are the ones people look to when the police refuse to help them," Miss Trent retorted as she stepped close to the desk. Leaning forward so their faces were mere inches apart, she went on, "Not every case we investigate is a crime, Inspector, and our clients expect discretion with the confidences they grant us. If I were to give you such a list, you and every policeman in London would hound our members. You would also watch our every move and maybe attempt to infiltrate our ranks. The society has never worked against the police or encouraged its clients to do the same, yet you insist on treating us like criminals. Unless you treat me and my members with the common courtesy we deserve, you shall have your list when I breathe my last." "It wasn't a request, Miss Trent. You have 1 day to give me the list or I'll come back to tear this house apart." Wolfe shoved his chair aside, sending it over, and took but 3 steps to exit the room. The clerk stood her ground until he was through the door before following. When the policeman opened the external door, she added, "Do that, but you'll find a representative of the press waiting for you." "Are you threatening me?" he threw back with a growl. "No. I'm trying to show you what an idiot you're being," she replied, her stoic expression returned. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. 1 day! Then I'm coming back." The entire frame shook as he slammed the door. Hearing his heavy footfalls descending the stone steps, the clerk crossed the hallway and pulled the bolt back into place. "What was all that about?" A gruff voice, whose accent was that of London's East End, inquired from the kitchen. Turning, Miss Trent smiled as she looked to the round face of Mr. Samuel Snyder in the dim gaslight. In his late 40s, Mr. Snyder was an older member of the Bow Street Society. His weathered features, calloused hands, heavy cloak, and broad-brimmed hat betrayed his long-standing occupation as a two-wheeler hansom cab driver. Standing in the corridor to the grand staircase's right, his extended belly, broad shoulders, and broad arms filled the space. Inspector Wolfe being his usual charming self, Miss Trent replied. Her smile faded as her mind replayed the conversation and she approached her friend. The grand staircase had rounded oak balusters holding up highly polished smooth oak handrails on both sides. Its steps were covered by plain burgundy carpet, while the remainder of the hallway's floor was a black and white check like a chessboard. A second corridor ran down the stairs left, and both led to doors into the kitchen. 4 more doors occupied the space, the second on the left being where Miss Trent and Inspector Wolfe had emerged from. The walls were decorated with paper matching the carpet in colour. Its design was a repetitive embossed floral pattern. Despite the space the room afforded, very little furniture occupied it. The grandfather clock housed in an oak casing stood between 2 doors on the right. A hat stand, complete with umbrella pan, was in the corner to one's right upon entering the house. These 2 pieces aside, the hallway was empty. "I need to pay someone a visit," Miss Trent announced. "I'll take you on my way home, since no work's come in," Mr. Snyder replied as he passed her. "No!" she snapped. The cabman turned and, shifting his head to the side, regarded her with surprise. Sensing his confusion, Miss Trent explained, "I'll be fine, Sam, but thank you all the same. Besides, it's still early. We can't afford to have a potential client walk away because there was no one home." She smiled. "Do you mind staying here while I'm gone? I shall only be an hour." "Nah, of course I don't," Mr. Snyder replied and unclasped his cloak to drape it over the handrail's end. "Thank you." Miss Trent gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "Best make myself a cuppa then," Mr. Snyder remarked, and disappeared back into the kitchen. Miss Trent meanwhile returned to her office and, taking her usual seat, plucked a black curved-lipped cylinder from a set of prongs. These prongs were in turn attached to a long, narrow wooden box mounted on the wall to the left of the window. In the centre of the box, at the front, was a non-adjustable black cone. As a result, Miss Trent had to lean forward to speak into it as she pressed the cylinder to her ear. A light drizzle started when Miss Trent crossed Trafalgar Square. Puddles from an earlier downpour reflected the occasional gas lamp or splashed hurried pedestrians' feet as they disturbed them in the pitch darkness. The familiar outline of St. Martin-in-the-Fields church tower also served as a beacon against the cloud-enshrouded sky to Miss Trent, who was headed toward it. Depicted in a painting of the same name by William Longsdale in 1888, St. Martin-in-the-Fields was a well-known landmark. Distinctly Corinthian in style, one critic upon its completion described it as though Wren had gone to Italy. 6 pillars stood at the summit of stone steps, leading from St. Martin's Lane below to form a portico. Above it was an impressive pediment depicting a carving of King George I's coat of arms, the reigning monarch at the time of the church's completion in 1726, and its church warden. It should also be noted St. Martin-in-the-Fields parish still includes both Buckingham and St. James's palaces, as it did back then. This royal connection did not stop at the facade either. A separate pew adjacent to, and on the same level as, the first of 2 raised galleries was reserved for the monarchy. A second, on the altar's opposite side and adjacent to the other gallery, was reserved for the Royal Navy. At the time of Miss Trent's visit, it was adorned with a plethora of naval flags. As she passed under the pediment, through the open doorway and into the nave proper, the sounds of her feet echoed, an effect fashioned by the acoustics which were, in turn, created by the nave's open-plan design and tunnel-vaulted ceiling, the ceiling being, arguably, the most striking feature within St. Martin-in-the-Fields because of its highly decorative gilt and painted plaster by Atari and Brigotti. Pillars, identical to their external counterparts in style, framed the pews on the ground floor. These pews were separated by a wide central aisle and faced the altar at the far end. To the right of the altar was a magnificent pulpit. Meanwhile the galleries, an important feature of Georgian churches, lined the edges of the church's interior, looking inward toward the pews. Containing pews of their own, these galleries were accessed by a set of stairs at their far ends, whilst their dark wood panelled facades were periodically separated by the pillars. Brass chandeliers, bathed in the light of their own candles, hung from the ceiling by chains. Though beautiful, their light wasn't adequate to fully illuminate the space. Thus, the church was strewn with shadows which danced in the flickering candlelight. The brilliant white of the pillars and ceiling continued to glow, however, creating the illusion of warmth where there was none. A handful of parishioners were dotted about the pews, and a clergyman tended to the altar. No one paid heed to Miss Trent as she climbed the steps to the right-hand gallery and walked along the front row of pews. Sitting in its centre, she released a deep breath and watched the exhaled steam as it faded. 10 tedious minutes passed, during which 2 more parishioners hurried through the portico and shook their umbrellas. The pitter-patter of rain against the stained glass windows provided a calming, rhythmic melody in the near silence of the church. Miss Trent pulled her coat close as a harsh shiver shot through her. Sighing, she turned her thoughts to the warm stove that waited for her at Bow Street. Becoming lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice someone entering the gallery until she heard the pew behind creak. At once reminded of a certain inspector, she stole a glance over her shoulder. The glimpse of brown eyes and moustache was enough to expel her panic. Settling back against her pew, she smirked at her foolishness. "You shouldn't have contacted me," the newcomer's soft voice stated, sending a steam cloud past her face. The clergyman, having finished whatever he'd been doing at the altar, climbed the pulpit steps and shuffled some papers there. Though minor, the rustling echoed around the church as if it were waves against rocks. Nonetheless, Miss Trent took the opportunity to muffle her whisper. "I had no choice. Inspector Wolfe came to the house tonight and demanded a full list of the society's members." The clergyman coughed, but no sound came from behind her. "Did you hear what I said?" "When does he want it by?" the newcomer inquired after a pause. Miss Trent turned and stared at him. He was in his early 30s, but the weight of exhaustion showed in the dark circles beneath his eyes. A knee-length black coat was worn over a brown cotton suit with matching waistcoat and tie. Upon his short, neatly combed brown hair sat a bowler hat of the same colour. A starched Eton collar peeked out from beneath a hand-knitted burgundy scarf, whilst his complexion was fair. "Please tell me you're not seriously considering giving it to him," Miss Trent said. "I didn't create the Bow Street Society to undermine the police, Rebecca," he replied as he took in her incredulous expression. "Rather to supplement it, however indirectly, when the public's confidence in Scotland Yard and its divisions wanes. Corruption and deception are already rife within the Metropolitan Police. Therefore society, and its clerk, mustn't be seen to be falling into the same bad habits by intentionally obstructing those officers who have proven themselves trustworthy and dedicated to their work. Even when those same officers wish to destroy the only group people turn to when they can't approach the police because of the same often open corruption, brutality and prejudice you speak of." "Is that what he told you?" "He didn't have to, Richard. He despised society's part in solving the Oxford Street case, so now he wants to make sure it doesn't happen again by giving his colleagues its list of members. He told me he wanted to ensure none of our members were attacked, robbed or murdered, but he also said he had plenty of arguments against us getting involved in a police investigation at all. He even accused me of putting Miss Webster's life at risk by sending her to investigate the room during the Oxford Street case." "Her life was put at risk," he pointed out. "Granted, the outcome of the case was beyond anyone's wildest expectations, but society, including you, must acknowledge and respect the potential for dangerous situations during the course of investigations. I make damned sure none of our members are put into situations they can't handle or which might unnecessarily put them into harm's way, Richard. You found the society, but chose me to run it, remember? While you were passing judgments and observations from the safety of your ivory tower, I am accepting commissions and managing cases under constant threat of exposure by Wolf, our members, and even you. You always insist on meeting in public despite knowing we could be seen by a patrolling policeman or someone who knows you as a chief inspector of the yard. I need not remind you of how disastrous that would be for our future and the society's. If you wish to lecture me about respecting and acknowledging the potential for danger, then I suggest you look at yourself first. She rotated in her seat to again have her back to him as silence fell between them. This time it was a literal silence too, for the parishioners were locked in prayer, the clergyman was absorbed in his papers, and the pitter-patter of the rain had stopped. As the moments passed, with little sound, Miss Trent imagined the shadows across the gallery had grown. Her shoulders felt heavier the more she thought about the withdrawal of candlelight and their conspicuousness as the gallery's only occupants. "Wolf can't have a copy of the list," she said. Her expression hardened. "Aside from it being a means to stop our members from investigating any future cases which the police might also be looking into, the list would also confirm Wolf's suspicions about Dr. Weeks." "True," Chief Inspector Jones admitted. "As for your other point, Inspector Wolf is simply doing his job. Metropolitan Police officers aren't allowed to permit any members of the public near a crime scene. Whenever our members have visited crime scenes, they've been invited by someone directly involved with the case, usually our clients. Our members have never trampled across a crime scene or encouraged our clients to intentionally deceive the police. On the contrary, Lady Alston advised our client in the Oxford Street case to inform the police of the Society's involvement. In short, the members of the Bow Street Society are not devious fools determined to ruin every police investigation they encounter. If you give Inspector Wolf a copy of the members' list, you'll be signing the Society's death warrant." "Only if he's allowed to keep and distribute it." Miss Trent again turned to face him. This time, however, her companion clasped his hands together, rested them upon her pew, and closed his eyes as if in prayer. Doing the same, but in front of her, she whispered, "Wolf would never give the list back once he had it in his hands." "He may, if it was a fellow police officer who gave it to him." Shifting in his seat a little as his expression became thoughtful, he continued, "The best interests of the Metropolitan Police and the Bow Street Society have to be protected. In spite of our differences, we want the same thing: justice for those who deserve it, and protection for the weak and vulnerable. Neither can openly assist the other without encountering mistrust and agitation among the Society's clients and the general populace of the Metropolitan Police Force." He frowned. "The revelation of my connection to society would be welcomed as warmly as a skunk in the House of Commons. What is needed, therefore, is a facilitator who has sympathies for both groups, but who can also be relied upon to be discreet when required." "Someone like Inspector Conway, you mean?" Miss Trent asked, referring to their mutual friend and grizzled head of Scotland Yard's mob squad housed within the Criminal Investigation Department. A soft hum sounded behind her. "You do realise," she began, "he would also discover the truth about Dr. Weeks if I gave him the members' list to pass to Wolf." "I do, but the fact Weeks is no longer active in the Society would serve to limit most of the damage. John Conway has supported the Society and its aims since its conception, despite not being one of its members. While he'll be undoubtedly shocked, even angered by the news, he'll understand why Weeks' assistance was invaluable in these past two cases." Chief Inspector Jones straightened and made the sign of the cross. "As unpalatable as the coming storm will be, the Society's continued existence now rests upon it being fully transparent with both Wolf and Conway." "You'll be revealing your full involvement with Inspector Wolf, then?" "I invited such a reply," he surrendered. "Fully transparent as far as the Society's members are concerned, then." "I'll be breaking their trust," she replied. "They expect me to keep their names and details confidential when they're not involved with any investigations. Have you considered what giving the list to Wolf may do to the dynamics of the Society, to how the members see and treat me? If you can think of an alternative solution that doesn't involve willful deceit and obstruction of the police, I would be more than happy to hear it." A heavy, exasperated sigh left Miss Trent's lips. She nonetheless analysed every possible option and scenario she could think of. Nothing her mind could produce fitted the Chief Inspector's criteria of legality and transparency, however. Dejected, she rubbed her temple and said, "I can't." Her hand fell to her lap. "I'll type up the list tonight. All said he would return to search the house unless I gave him the list within 24 hours. "And he shall if you don't," Chief Inspector Jones replied with a frown. "I'll send word to Conway to let him know I'll be paying him a visit at home first thing tomorrow morning." Taking a notebook and pencil from his pockets, he rested the first on the back of Miss Trent's pew. After writing down Conway's address, Chief Inspector Jones ripped out the page and passed it to her. He said, "This is only for the purposes of meeting with him tomorrow. Memorize it and destroy it." Miss Trent folded the page and slipped it under her cloak as the Chief Inspector's pew creaked, this time as he stood. Miss Trent, who had remained facing the other way, felt a gentle hand upon her shoulder. Without looking up, she said, "I've already forgiven you, Richard." She considered a moment. "And I'll burn the paper as soon as I've committed the address to memory." "Thank you," his soft voice said from above. "Until tomorrow, Miss Trent. Until tomorrow." The two bid one another good night, and Miss Trent listened as he retreated along the gallery and down its stairs. Once she'd heard him pass under the portico, she looked to the address. Chapter 1. Bow Street was quiet when Miss Trent turned its corner. The usual music devotees had passed through on their way to the Royal Opera House, while the nearby Covent Garden Market was deserted. Life remained at the Bow Street police station, however. Attached to the magistrates' court, whose windows were in darkness, the Holborn or E Division's headquarters were but a short walk from the society's own base operations. A constable in a hefty wax-coated cape passed Miss Trent and climbed the station's steep steps. Warm light formed a patent leather shine upon the soaked stone as he opened one of two doors and went inside. Sickly sweet scents of manure and moss clung to the dense cold damp of the soot-filled air, so much so it was wise to breathe through a handkerchief or, failing that, one's fingers. Yet, despite this, the silhouette of a pipe-smoking man blocked the light until it disappeared, the billowing smoke from his lungs bolstered by the steam of his breath. "Shouldn't be out and about in this weather, Miss Trent," he said when she neared, recognising the voice as Sergeant Bird's. She knew the connotation of concern was baseless due to his tone's upward turn. Having an aversion toward any interaction with him under normal circumstances, she felt even less compelled to indulge in such tonight. Passing without response, therefore, she next heard a loud scrape of a boot when he moved to follow. A sudden furore in the police station forced him to abandon the idea, however, and he went back inside, much to her appreciation. Leaving the chaos of E Division behind, she quickened her pace as the sky threatened another downpour. Within seconds she felt its first spots on her cheeks, and she lifted her skirts to hurry. Puddles splashed when she half jogged through them, while thunder rumbled in the distance. Seeing the familiar gas lamp outside the Bow Street Society's house, her determination to avoid the rain appeared to have paid off, until she saw something she hadn't expected. The gas lamp's light hit the black, varnished side of a four-wheeler carriage. A single driver, half cast in shadow, sat upon an elevated box at its front. Having halted when she'd seen the carriage, Miss Trent walked toward it with caution. Rough hands, wrinkled by moisture, held the reins of two white stallions between the driver's bent knees. His heels, meanwhile, were pressed together against the box's base while his feet jutted out at opposing angles. So cramped yet tall was he, she was convinced he was about to dive from his seat. Only when she went closer did she see the limited space he occupied. Nevertheless, she felt uneasy. His hooked nose and bulging lips, barely lit by the gaslight, remained motionless. The rest of his features were hidden by the pitch-black shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. She went even closer, but still he didn't move. Another rumble of thunder marked the shower's arrival. Droplets fell from his hat's brim onto his bloodless hands. "Excuse me, are you waiting for someone?" she inquired from beneath the gas lamp. His head turned toward her, and his hat's shadow covered his remaining visible features. A deluge of water poured from his hat as the rain became torrential. Melodic tinkles, accompanied by deep, rapid thuds of the rain striking the metal gas lamp and wooden carriage roof respectively, surrounded them. A strong wind also swept between and across them, whipping up the rain and sending her coat skirt into a flap. All he did was tilt his head forward until the wind dropped, at which point he recommenced his stare. "If you're not waiting for anyone, I suggest you move on," she shouted over the noise. The driver's response was to slide his head back toward his horses. Another sudden gust of wind, much stronger than the first, threatened to pull Miss Trent off balance. Bending into it, she gave the driver another moment to reply before she ran up the steps to the front door. "You okay?" Mr. Snyder inquired upon opening it. "I will be once I'm inside." She hurried past and, while Mr. Snyder closed the door, pulled the curtain of the adjacent window aside. Peering through the wall of water, she saw the driver looking at her. She dropped the curtain and stepped back straight into Mr. Snyder. His frame was bulkier than hers, however. As a result, the impact caused her to bounce forward and stumble. She would have fallen if Mr. Snyder hadn't taken a firm grip of her arm. "Has something happened?" he inquired, glancing between her and the window. "No," she forced a smile. "I'm just letting my imagination get the better of me, that's all." "Not like you?" "It's been an emotional night," she said, and, removing her coat, hung it upon the stand. As she did so, her mind whirled with Wolf's words, the clergyman's cough, Joan's foul prayers, and the void of a driver's face. Shivers gripped her, and she remembered she was wet. "I'll get a blanket." Mr. Snyder went past her and into the kitchen. She glanced over her shoulder at the window. Her mind again formed the driver's featureless face, and she hurried after Mr. Snyder. Though he was surprised, he didn't remark upon her joining him. Instead, he passed her the blanket and said, "We've got a guest." "Where?" She dabbed at her cold face and wrapped the blanket about her shoulders. Its warmth enveloped her, and she took a towel from above the stove to dry her face and hands. Her coat had kept her middle and skirts dry, but her boots and stockings were beyond hope. Sitting down, she took off her coat but paused to quirk a brow in Mr. Snyder's direction, and he turned his back to her. "The parlour." Miss Trent stood, lifted her skirts, put her foot on the chair, and rolled down the wet stocking. Repeating the process with the other, she then dropped her skirts. "You may look now." She went to the stove and, holding her hands above it, looked over her shoulder at him. "Who is it?" "Not him." Mr. Snyder gave a soft chuckle. "Wolf's not come back since you left." A sudden, more intense rumble of thunder shook the walls, followed by a flash and clap of lightning. Even at the back of the house, the two heard the startled screech and whinnying of horses coming from the street. Mr. Snyder at once left the kitchen, not noticing if Miss Trent followed or not. "Best go and check on Blue Shirt," she heard him mutter as she entered the hallway after him. When he opened the door, a tremendous gust of wind burst into the room. The gas lamp's flames bent and lurched when Mr. Snyder, halfway through the doorway, took his cloak from Miss Trent. He then released the door and hurried outside, obliging her to lurch forward to catch the door to prevent it from striking the wall. She watched as he reached his horse. The cab it pulled was parked behind the silent drivers, and took its reins to calm it. She had forgotten about Mr. Snyder's cab, so caught up she had been in the uncanny situation she had encountered. Looking to the unmarked carriage, she felt easier when she saw its driver lean forward to reassure its horses. The storm was too fine for her to loiter with the door open, however, so she pushed against the wind to close it. After several attempts, as she braced her feet against the floor to put her entire body weight into each, she succeeded. A deep exhalation left her lungs the instant she slid the bolt into place and took a rest against the door. Even then she felt the wood tremble under the wind's demands to enter. She pulled across the second bolt and, with a turn of the key, felt secure at last. Then she felt it. The unmistakable sense of being watched. Bit by bit, she turned her head. What she saw made her recoil in an instant. A silhouette stood 3 feet from her. No more accurate a description could ever be fathomed for what she saw. It was shrouded entirely in black, from the crown of its hat to the soles of its feet. Facial features, buttons, cloth and flesh all were indistinguishable against the now restored glow of the gaslight. Whether man or woman, she couldn't hope to tell.
"Are you Miss Rebecca Trent?"
A voice hissed. The silhouette's head had shifted in shape as the words were uttered, but no pink gums or white teeth were seen.
"Yes,"
she replied, barely hearing her voice over her pounding heart.
"Bow Street Society representatives are requested at this address,"
the voice hissed. Uncertain which address the figure referred to, Miss Trent parted her lips to inquire when she caught sight of a white square against a sea of black. The white lifted and she realised it was in her hand. After a moment's hesitation, she tugged the paper from the finger's grip.
"They will be given further instruction upon arrival,"
the voice continued.
"If no one arrives at midnight tonight, it shall be understood the Society refuses the commission."
"Why can't the instruction be given to me?" Miss Trent inquired, her courage returning considering the figure's vagueness. A vision of Wolf's face also formed in her mind, followed by his voice.
"And putting your members' lives at risk in the process."
Swallowing hard, she added, "I can't, in good conscience, send members into the unknown."
"You have until midnight tonight,"
the voice hissed as the silhouette advanced.
"You let a vulnerable young woman investigate a room you knew nothing about. She would be dead."
"You're not leaving until I have some answers," she demanded, spreading her legs and gripping the doorway to block it. The silhouette didn't stop or even slow, however.
"Midnight tonight,"
it hissed, and taking hold of Miss Trent's shoulder, tossed her aside. Landing with a grunt, she was stunned to find herself on the floor. The silhouette had meanwhile slid back the bolts and thrown open the door. Violent winds and rain again erupted into the hallway, this time extinguishing the gas lamps. "Stop!" Miss Trent yelled, scrambling to her feet as the silhouette ran. By the time she made it outside, the silhouette was almost to an awaiting carriage. The driver, who had been so motionless earlier, leaned down and flipped open the carriage door at his passenger's approach. When the silhouette then leapt inside, the driver took his whip to his horses and the carriage jolted forward. The silhouette had to grip the carriage's door frame to prevent him, or her, from tumbling out. In a heartbeat though, as Miss Trent reached them, the silhouette snatched the carriage's interior door handle and slammed it shut. Miss Trent attempted to grab the external one, but the carriage's speed whipped it from her fingers. Stumbling into the road, narrowly avoiding falling onto the carriage's large wheel in the process, Miss Trent caught herself in time to see the carriage slip away from the gas lamp's light and into the ferocious night. Mr. Snyder placed a London map upon the kitchen table and, smoothing out the creases, used his finger to trace a circle around an area in the map's top left corner. "All this is Hampstead Heath." He glanced up to meet Miss Trent's gaze and tapped the map. "Here's Jack Straw's Castle Inn. Next to that's the flagstaff on the note. A lot of the heath's grass and trees." "It doesn't make sense." Miss Trent rubbed her temples. "Why insist on meeting society members there, when here is more private?" She dropped her hands to the table. "He, she, whoever it was, didn't tell you anything? Not even their name?" Mr. Snyder shook his head. "They asked for you by name. When I told them you wasn't here, they said they'd wait." Miss Trent sighed. "Are you going to send someone?" Miss Trent knew whomever went to the flagstaff would be as vulnerable as Miss Webster was, perhaps more so, as she had no idea about the commission. Yet, what was society for but to investigate crimes the police wouldn't? Clearly, their potential client had their reasons for subterfuge. At least, she assumed as such. She looked at Mr. Snyder's expectant face, broad frame and knuckles, the same knuckles which had knocked out many a man during long prize fights. Mr. Snyder's skill had made him the perfect person to send. Nonetheless, sending him alone was out of the question. So too was sending any of the others to accompany him. Not until she knew more about the case, at least. After further procrastination, she said, "Inspector Conway." "What? You Inspector Conway should go." You're both more than capable of looking after yourselves, and I wasn't told not to involve the police. The only police officers we could trust with this are Inspectors Conway and Wolfe. Between the two, Conway's the lesser evil. I dunno. What if we don't want to go? We have to try. Miss Trent pulled on her boots and stood. If you could drive me to his house, Sam, I will convince him to help us. Do you know where he lives, then? Of course. Miss Trent smiled. How? Ask me no questions, and I'll tell you no lies. Mr. Snyder chuckled, and picking up his hat, followed her outside.